Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here. It's been an eventful trip for me to get to you today, and thankfully, EasyJet were ever gracious in allowing me to land. So it's a great pleasure. So I was talking with Andy, who's obviously organised everything here today, about what would keep everyone awake, and he said, just come out with the biggest, boldest headline you can think of, and I said, okay, growing for domination. And I thought no one wants any like little pussyfooting around, so I thought people might stick around if they think, okay, we're going to try and dominate the space of whatever market or industry or vertical you're in, rather than just, isn't this nice and fluffy and aren't we all friends together? I do the nice and fluffy stuff as well, but I thought, let's do something a bit different. So I've had an opportunity over the last 6 years working as a growth hacker to work with some very unique companies, some big, as you can see, some small, some you'll never hear of, some that have been sold, some have exited. And it's provided me with some really useful insights that I kind of want to share with you today. But specifically, I'm going to be talking with you about something a bit different and the new venture that I've actually just joined. So the company I'm with is called IMG, and we are a media group. And that means that we're actually working with an integration between tech and conferences and live events and year-long community engagement projects. And this is something that's kind of missing at the moment. There's kind of this disconnect. And my business partner, she's like the guru of the media world. In the UK, she's like darling with everyone. It's incredible. And she was like, we need to really integrate what we're doing here, and we need tech to come on board. So I was brought in specifically to actually help, or how do we tap into those kind of markets, and how do we actually almost draw across what the tech's doing, which is phenomenal, and most of the industry don't realize anything about it. So like I say, at the end of this, same with probably everyone else, please feel free to come up, talk to me afterwards. I'm more than happy to offer you some time and share some insights that may help. And specifically, the area that I'm looking at, and I'm actually managing the fund of, is two areas in particular. One is a PE fund that actually looks at typical acquisitions. And this is something that we kind of do and don't really talk about openly in these kind of forums. I've had the opportunity and pleasure of speaking at a lot of conferences, from the big 50,000 Web Summit ones in Ireland and now Lisbon, to the much more smaller, intimate conferences where you can actually really get into the meat of what's happening. And the fund that we're looking at is actually getting an average of between 6 to 12x at exit. And we also do a venture fund as well, where we're actually investing into up-and-coming tech that's very, very applicable and has real growth potential. And part of the reason, is obviously as well, is that I've judged enough startup competitions, pitches, growths. Venture capitalists have come to me saying, what do you think of this portfolio? So I'm usually quite good at picking a winner. And so that's how we've basically come to this. But specifically, when I'm talking to a lot of tech startups and tech companies who are usually post-seed, Series A, maybe Series B, I always kind of ask them, what's your ultimate goal? What are you actually trying to achieve in 2, 3, 5 years' time? And some of them, you can usually tell very quickly if they are not going to do very well, because you say, oh, we're just going to kind of see how it goes. Just want to keep getting more money. And you're like, well, why? Well, here's 10 more euros. There you go crazy, right? It doesn't matter. What is your end specific goal? So this is a question we're going to come back to during this session, if that's okay. Now, you may or may not know Morten Lund, but he's probably one of the really, really interesting investors around Estonia, invested in Skype at the beginning, made some money, lost some money, made a lot of money. And we were sat down having dinner, and I got an opportunity to ask him, and I said, what's one of the biggest problems that you face when you're assessing a startup, when you're assessing whether you should invest into it? And he said, the biggest problem I have, bar none, is that everyone wants to be people would rather be king than rich. And I thought, okay, well, that's quite an interesting mindset, so just help me understand that. And he then proceeded to tell me how basically people feel they have to retain so much control, so much equity, so much direct influence over the direction of their company that they sometimes get so blindsided by that, they lose other opportunities and end up king of nothing. Whereas what he looks for is the kind of founders, the kind of CEOs who are open and adaptable to opportunities that come to you, and then from that are able to make intelligent decisions going forward, not emotional decisions. And this is a key thing, and it's something to bear in mind when you're thinking about your own company or the company within where you're working. Because if you are overly emotionally attached to any decision-making process, and you're thinking, well, if I give away another 3%, how's that going to affect my outcome? And it's not worth it. Then you start getting into a very difficult conversation, and your growth potential starts to reduce of what you can actually achieve. So, don't take my word for it. I mean, let's have a think about how this could go. Snapchat, obviously, I don't really get a chance to use it much because I'm not 15. But obviously turned down $3 billion in cash from Facebook. Okay, Facebook are sloshing around with this massive war chest. Facebook obviously turned down $1 billion famously from Yahoo at the time. And you could questionably argue how valuable is Yahoo now. WhatsApp, apparently, kind of unconfirmed, kind of confirmed, it depends who you talk to within the industry. They actually turned down $10 billion from Google, which at the time everyone was like, man, that is absolutely ridiculous. But then, obviously, as we've seen, they've sold it to Facebook for $19 billion. These are the kind of things of when you're thinking about where you're going to be selling or exiting your company to, if that's the decision you want to take, who are you actually going to be looking to sell it to? And Groupon. Groupon were actually the fastest growing company in the history of tech, okay? They were offered and turned down $6 billion from Google. You could probably question, was that the right decision? Has Groupon now suddenly magically turned themselves around to be this powerhouse again that was the wonder child of the Silicon Valley? I'm guessing now it's more of a discount shop, okay? So was that the right decision for them? And as we saw earlier with Patrick's slide, there are now hundreds and hundreds of unicorns out there, but they don't all just get to be unicorns from just doing growth in a very traditional way. And this is what we're going to come on to. So specifically, I'm going to be talking today about how do unicorns and how do companies such as yourselves actually go through acquiring other companies, bringing their technology, their talent, whatever it is, into your company and accelerating that growth rate. This is something that I haven't actually spoken about publicly before, but Andy asked for something different. I was like, okay, this is different. And so, like I say, this is what everyone wants, a unicorn, right? This is what everyone in the room wants to be somehow. Now, I'm not judging if this is your view of what kind of unicorn you want to be, all right? But one thing I will tell you is that there is not one single tech Silicon Valley giant or otherwise unicorn, quote unquote, who sees themselves like this. How they actually see themselves is like this, okay? Domination, King Kong, tearing up New York, right? That is how Facebook sees themselves. That is how Google sees themselves. That is how Microsoft are coming in and seeing themselves, right? They don't see themselves as a unicorn, nice and fluffy and airy-fairy and things like that. They're actually very, very astute at what they're doing, and they're trying to dominate the space. To give you an example, Uber, I had a pleasure of working with them, and if you actually look at some of the interviews with Travis Kalanick, obviously he's the CEO and founder, what's really interesting is that many people don't really understand what his longer-term strategy is, okay? What's the valuation of Uber these days? About 50 billion, right? Well, how do you get to a valuation like that? That's an insane amount. Well, part of it is because Travis doesn't see Uber as just delivering black cabs as taxis, as democratizing taxi service. He doesn't see that as the product. That's the thin end of the wedge. That's the very small part. Where he sees the growth potential with Uber is that he's creating a networked grid across every city in the world. You have that kind of data, that you have those kind of mobile payments, you have that level of machine learning, artificial intelligence, developing algorithms that help you to predict and understand human behavioral economics. That is something very, very, very valuable. So when you're looking at some of these big companies, we always just see them as just like the little apps they are on our phones or the little websites that we go and visit. But what's actually happening behind them is that they have a very substantial acquisition strategy with very specific skills that they're trying to acquire, user bases that they're trying to influence and develop and onboard. And why shouldn't you be thinking about that right now? Right? Why shouldn't you be thinking about that in the same way right now? Facebook has got a big war chest, sure, but they don't know anyone in this room other than what you've told them, right? They don't know you, and that is your advantage. I've spoken with a lot of companies, and they don't understand that if a lot of the smaller startups are actually to start looking for opportunities within their own communities, within their own verticals, within their own markets, or even in complementary markets, you could actually start to develop your own equivalent of a Facebook acquisition strategy. And that's what we're going to walk through. But as I say, it all depends on what is your end goal. Do you want to be on the beach, sold all your shares and equity, done a 3-year earn out, okay? Or do you want to be working? Do you want to be building the next King Kong? I don't know how you build King Kong, but what do you want to be earning? What do you want to be making? What are you going to do with the money when you make it, right? Or do you just don't know? And that's the worst position to be in. I don't know where I'm going to get to. Well, think about Facebook. They bought WhatsApp for a very, very specific reason. In fact, many specific reasons. It gave Facebook a very valuable opportunity to quickly onboard a large group of people. Everyone then who was on Facebook knew that WhatsApp had been bought by them, and their acquisitions and their monthly users went up instantly as a result. And Facebook know that their messenger service isn't great. It's not exactly loved by many, many people. But this was another route to those disengaged users, and that was valuable. And then you start looking at, well, what's the actual cost per user? How much revenue can I get out of them? What's their lifetime value? Was this a cheaper way of a customer acquisition strategy than actually investing in trying to grow it from where they've become stagnated? If you look at Facebook, I use Facebook as an example because pretty much the planet is on it. But if you look at Facebook now, their growth and marketing strategy has changed dramatically from where it was. Now you see Facebook advertising with billboards on sides of roads and on TV and in the cinema. And that's because their growth strategy has stagnated from what they were traditionally doing. They grew to such an extent that I think they've got something like 1.8 billion users, and now they're struggling to carry on that growth. And if they can't carry on that growth, their share price drops, right? So when you're looking at other companies who are within your community, within your industry, who would be a good synergy? Who would instantly accelerate your growth rate? There should be someone you can be thinking of right now. You probably might be sat next to them. But there should be people within your community right now who you could think of, what about if we were to get a controlling stake in their company? How could we leverage that for our benefit? Now, usually one of the things that most people then start to think of is, well, do we want to be acquiring or do we want to just be building? And I don't know. It depends on what your strategy is. But one of the things I will say is that if you're looking for a big exit, even if you're looking at a big exit, relying on just user growth, your own marketing engine, your own growth engine is tough. Believe me, it is tough. And it's much, much more competitive now than it has ever been. So when we're talking about this, I think just think of it in a additional strategy you may want to consider. So I wouldn't recommend this to anyone who hasn't got a decent amount of seed funding, obviously, because it's expensive. And I wouldn't be talking to anyone who's pre-seed also because you haven't got the network that you need to make this happen. And I'll come on to how you can actually make it happen. So usually post-seed, Series A, you can get some good deals, all right? And when I talk about critical gaps in your strategy right now, you know sat there exactly where you've got gaps, where you're struggling, okay? Maybe it's talent, maybe it's, like Patrick was saying, customer acquisition costs, okay? How can you reduce that? Maybe it's actually technology itself. You know, maybe you don't have the skill set. Maybe you can't easily just get hold of it. Maybe there's no one in Malta who can do what you need to do, and you can't trust anyone if you go outside and do some look at some freelancers, okay? Perhaps you want some specific raw data or some analyzed data that you can't get anywhere else, that someone else just has lying around. But until you go and actually ask the question and start that dialogue, you will never find out. And most people are too, I wouldn't say scared, but are too cautious to step outside of that and to just go and ask people and say, how much do you want for it? Let's work out a deal. What can we do? Is it proprietary data, or can we all use it? What's your conditions on that? What's your data license? Okay? But nobody does this. The few who do really exploit it, and their growth rate goes up. Also, I mean, look, if you think about the revenue streams as well, you then increase your opportunity to upsell, cross-sell, downsell. Right? Upsell them to whatever you're doing, cross-sell them across whatever you're doing, or downsell them to whatever you're doing, depending on what their own price points are. Simple stuff, really, really easy and very easy to do. There's a question that Chris Sacca, who's probably one of the most famous investors in Silicon Valley, I'm not sure if anyone's heard of him. I would listen to anything that man says. But he always asks, what is your unfair advantage? What gives you this incredible advantage over everyone else that makes it unfair that you're even in the game? What is that? Is it some knowledge, some insight that you have? And if you don't have one, then you may have to rethink your business strategy, because then you're just playing a catch-up game, and there's not a lot that you can compete against. And then you can think of, well, if we're acquiring somebody else, how do we start that transaction? How do we start that initial discussion? And when I talk about acquire here, we can also talk about controlling equity in a company as well, okay? But once you have that, then you can start to redirect things back to you. Then that becomes valuable. So when you're thinking about who the other ones that we could be looking at, you should be thinking about who are their investors. Do we know them? Do we like them? What are their network like? On a personal level, as their founders, are they very networked, or are they very insular? And then what's your growth metrics that you're looking at, that you're being measured on by your investors, by people who are working with you? And it'll be different for everybody, usually. The ones that I generally tend to pick out the most, which are most frequently represented, is customer acquisition cost, monthly average user, customer lifetime value, and churn rate. If you can't reduce churn rate, forget everything else, right? So how do they do it? And you might be thinking, well, why would a CEO want to just give up, or just sell me their majority stake, or sell me the company altogether for a song? Well, it can be very, very many different reasons. Take, for example, a gentleman here, I've forgotten his name. He's the CEO of Superdry, the Superdry Group, which is a clothing brand. Many, many, many hundreds. I think it was at one point in 2010, it was valued at $1 billion. He had to sell majority stake because he was getting divorced and he couldn't afford his wife. So people have lots of different reasons about why they sell. Some of it you think are logical and they want to raise capital or equity or whatever it is. And some people have much more deeper personal reasons. Perhaps they're at a level of burnout where they just say, I can't do this anymore. Perhaps they got into it because they just love coding. They just love sitting there and developing something really exciting. And then it started to become a company. And then they started to have to have meetings with board members and settle HR disputes and God knows what else. Okay? And it's taken them away from who they really are and what they really enjoy being. And they want to go back to that. Sometimes it might be for something much, much more simple, as in like they've just had enough. And they want to just leave it all behind and disappear off to a little island and put their feet up in the water and get very bored. I don't know. But you'd be surprised when you're actually talking to people who have gone through a startup, have gone through a good acquisition process, and they're burnt out. A lot of them are tired, and they're almost waiting for someone to come along, hand them a big check, and say, I'm going to take your pain away. Let me help you. And you'd be surprised how many people will do it. So who would you actually look to acquire? I always think of it almost like fishing. There's every different company is slightly different. They do things a little bit differently. The culture might be slightly different to how yours is, or it might be better than yours, or it might be not as exciting as yours. And there are many different things to think of as well. So for example, when you're looking at these things, nobody knows your competitors as well as you do. Nobody knows your market as well as you do. Nobody knows the way the technology is progressing as well as you do, I would hope. If I'm an investor investing in your company, I would expect you to know those answers immediately. So you can tell me who are the challengers, who are the rising stars, who are the dead dogs, right? Back to my old MBA terms, okay? You should be the ones who know and recognize the opportunities ahead of everyone else, because investors don't have time to know every single market. We tend to focus on some where we know that there's some interesting stuff developing. But if you can provide an insight into that market that myself or other investors aren't aware of, then you are valuable and you are interesting. And then we come on to the tricky thing of, well, how do I actually finance it? Okay, we haven't got millions lying around. Well, no. But if someone took time to invest in your company, they have trust in you. And if they have trust in you, then they believe in you. And if you develop that relationship with that, whoever that investor is, or however many number of investors that is, if you go to them genuinely and say, look, there's something really exciting happening here in the market. These guys over here look as though they're about to go under. They've got a massive user base, very disenfranchised. We could take them over, we could take them in, and we could bring them on board to what we're doing. We could strip mine some of their assets, take out some of the staff costs, and very quickly transgress all of their stuff onto our servers, and very quickly we can start making an impact. And they'll do it for this much. Do you think that the investor that you've had that relationship with over the last 1-2 years is going to be interested? Yeah, of course they are. Do you think they might invest? Likely, if you've got that level of trust with them. Do you think that they would then go that one step further and say, okay, how much do you need to get them? How much do you need to put in an offer? Do you want me to do the deal, or do you want to do it? Do you want to broker it for me? You can get a commission? Fine. Okay? But it really comes down to what is the relationship that you have with that investor at the beginning. If you've just taken their money and you're not really giving back to what you said you were going to, you may want to reconsider how you go forward with another offer of, oh, why don't you buy these guys as well? But there's the opportunity there. And the thing is that the people who do this do it very well, okay? Because they know everybody. But it's like a bit of a secret around the community. There's not that many people who really go into it. If you're talking about structuring the deal, one of the things I would probably suggest is that you actually get someone on board who really knows what they're doing for that, okay? And then you can hire them from some KPMG or some accounting firm, or bring someone in who's actually knows about how to structure these kind of deals as an M&A expert. But I would recommend that you actually start thinking about this actively, because there are a lot of opportunities that you're probably missing. And like I say, why would investors would be interested anyway? Well, the biggest problem that an investor has is deal flow. Is everyone familiar with that term? Right? You should be. So deal flow basically is how many deals are being put forward in front of me constantly that I can be assessing all the time to actually work out, okay, is this worth a go or no go? Should we take this discussion one step further or not? Are we in or out? Which way are you leaning? And to be honest, a lot of companies have struggled with deal flow because there's just not that many good opportunities coming up. So if you were to go to an investor and say, I've got this really good opportunity, not only can we get it for pennies, but we can also integrate everything into our company and accelerate the growth rate of what we're doing, we're definitely interested at that point. Why wouldn't we be, right? And also one of the biggest things is this psychological thing of FOMO. Everyone's heard of that? FOMO, fear of missing out. And it's one of the biggest regrets that virtually every investor has, is the one that got away. Oh yeah, I saw the Airbnb guys, right? There's a famous story that Chris Sacca tells, and he met the guys from Airbnb when they were, I think when they were Air Bed and Breakfast, before they'd even shortened their name down. And he actually said to them, so you're going to rent out rooms in other people's houses and take money? And these guys said, yeah. And they said, someone is going to get killed and the blood will be on your hands. He said, I'm walking away. What's that now? $4 billion, $5 billion business? All right. So that kind of initial emotional reaction then has a consequence on that investor. It's like, shit, that's like, I could be made another several $100 million on that deal if I hadn't had that response to it. So this is constantly what investors are going through. They're trying to assess, okay, are you going to be the next Uber? Are you going to be the next Airbnb? Are you going to be the next Spotify? Are you going to be the next WhatsApp? Are you going to be the next Facebook? Okay? That's what gets an investor excited. And then lastly, you kind of come on to, well, what is your end goal? Okay? I mean, you're either going to go for domination, okay, and you're going to go through IPOs, or you're going to go and just keep growing and growing and growing, or you're going to exit, right? Those are the only two options. Or the worst one, which obviously I haven't mentioned, is that it all goes horribly wrong and you're bankrupt. But Andy kept telling me to keep it light. So I thought a quick thing from Mark Zuckerberg would help. And this was his actual business card. I'm CEO, bitch. Which he actually handed out to investors. Didn't go down that well. And I think it was Peter Thiel who actually said, Mark, you have to rein it in. Peter Thiel was obviously one of the original investors in Facebook. He said, I think you might have to rein it in and tone down your language slightly. But, who's to argue with a guy who's making that kind of money? So if you're going to exit your company, start from the end in mind. So right now, if you're a founder, if you're a CEO, you should already know who would be your ideal that you want to exit to. Start with the end in mind, right? So do you want to sell them to Facebook? Do you want to sell it to, do you want Google, Microsoft, right? Do you want to sell it to them? Where's it going otherwise? Okay? The founders, the CEOs who struggle the most don't know where it's going to end. And then you just go on this never-ending journey and nothing comes to an end of it. That starts to be painful. So be very specific. Who is your ideal exit partner right now? And then what is your relationship with them? If you want to exit to Facebook, and who am I to say that you can't, right? Who am I to say you can't? But what's your relationship with Facebook right now? Is it just the same as most of us with an app? We hate Messenger. Or do you have some kind of in with them? Do you have some way in with their due diligence department, with their lawyers, with some kind of avenue into who they're going to exit to? Okay? How do they think and feel about you? Okay? Chances are they probably never heard of you. Okay? Unless you've somehow got on their radar. Why would they even care about you? If you think they're looking at people like WhatsApp, okay? Are you too small for them? Potential. And then also, when are you going to exit? So what is your time scale? Not everyone thinks about this. Not everyone thinks, oh yeah, 3 years' time, that's it, we're exiting to Facebook, we've lined this up, we've lined that up, this is our growth rate, this is our user retention. Okay? If you start thinking about that, then you can actually start to quantify an actual progressive revenue growth with an endpoint, with a payout. And then, of course, just how you're going to structure it. Because, believe me, there are many, many people getting screwed over. Because at the end of the day, they've just got more expensive lawyers. Okay? But that shouldn't stop you for a second. And the final point that I'll leave you with, just keep you all happy, is whatever you're going to decide to do, whether you are going to go for massive domination of any market or vertical you're in, whether you're going to do an exit, whether you're going to start acquiring other companies, or something else, the main thing I would say is that plan as though luck is against you. Plan as though everything can go possibly wrong. And then when you get that one little hint that everything is going right, go with it as quickly and as fast as possible, because that ride is not going to last forever, and as soon as it does, it stops very abruptly. My name's Ross. come and find me. If you need me to talk about anything or you want to come and speak to me about anything you're doing, I'm more than happy to. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.